Hi, everyone. Thank you once again for coming to TC Live. TC Live is our regular webinar where we speak to leading tech operators in order to give our audience an insight into what's happening in the field and ecosystem generally. So today, on today's episode, where we'll be discussing the future of digital media in Africa. Where is Africa's digital media landscape headed? We have two interesting speakers on the panel today. I have Ciku here, Ciku Kimeria, who is the editor-in-chief at Quartz Africa. She's got a very interesting profile. Ciku has written 40 articles, 40 pieces for Quartz. She was a contributor for a long time before eventually becoming the editor-in-chief on the platform. She's the author of 2 novels and has written for a variety of outlets, including African Arguments, OK Africa, and the African Report. Ciku has a wealth of communication and project management experience, having worked for and served as a communication advisor to Dalberg Advisors, Open Society Initiative of West Africa, and the Africa Agriculture and Trade Investment Fund. Ciku has a Bachelor of Science degree in management from MIT and speaks English, Swahili, and French. Fun fact, she's based in Dakar, Senegal. I mean, I just found that out. I thought she was based in Nairobi. Also, Fadekemi is here, Fadekemi Abiru, who is the editor-in-chief at Stears Business. She is a development economist who previously worked for the UK government, and where she provided economic analysis on regional development, international trade, and analysis in government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. She has extensive experience in conducting economic research and performing data analysis in a bid to help research organizations and government make better decisions. We'll have a 40-minute conversation with these two interesting people. And then after that, we'll have 35 minutes of question and answers. Let's jump right into it. I had a conversation during our dry run yesterday, and there was this very interesting coincidence about how both of you started your career at Quartz and then at Stears. So maybe let's see who go first. How's the journey been so far? Yeah, as editor-in-chief.
Hi, thank you for that great introduction, and thanks for everyone who's joining us today. I would say the journey has been quite interesting. Just a quick rundown of my background was that I started my career first as a strategy consultant I worked for 6 years or so in development consulting at Dalberg, and then I moved to become the Africa Communication Manager. Then I took a break off. I left and worked as a freelance consultant, a freelance writer, wrote my novels, quite a bit of a break. And then that was also the time when I was writing articles for different publications, including Quartz. And then I took on this role of the Quartz Africa editor just in June of this year. So that's been my interesting background. But I would say it's been a great run so far. I feel as if all those jumps that I was doing, they were preparing me for this. And yeah, I love it. This has been my dream job for a long time. So I'm quite happy to be here.
Fadekemi, I mean, you also as well just took the mantle as AIC at Stears Business. Very, very reputable news platform here in Lagos. What has it been like? Few weeks, few months?
It's been a few months, but I think it's roughly kind of the same trajectory as Ciku, where, it started off contributing on a freelance basis just to Stears Business. And that was just, writing articles, just analyzing the economy and trying to understand why people make the decisions that they make, why the government makes the decisions that they make, and how that impacts everyone's daily lives. And at the same time, I was also, I think you already covered this, working as a government economist in the civil service. So just coming into this role now, I guess the main thing I'll say is that significant jump, right? It's where you come from the bureaucracy of government to, working at a very exciting startup that's just dedicated to improving information coverage across the continent. So not just Nigeria, but across the continent as well. And I think the main thing I'll just say is it's been exciting. It's definitely been a steep learning curve, like so much to learn, a lot of exciting projects like always in the works, and just figuring out the best ways to execute them. So yeah, looks like it's going to be an interesting journey ahead.
Cool. I mean, I think that raises some very interesting facts. Myself, I did mathematics at the University of Lagos, and now I'm front running in journalism. Many of the digital news media platforms have operators that don't have like the traditional training, or would I say certification, first degree certification in mass media, mass comm, or any of those. Do you think there's any negative impact or downsides to that for the digital media operators here in Africa? Ciku, go first.
Actually, the way I think about it, even just hearing Fadekemi talk about her background, the way I think about it, I feel as if when we've had all this different experience, what we are bringing in is quite unique and rich. So I think it's quite good if you are an editor who maybe you would study journalism and so on, there's still a lot of strengths with having gone that path. But I also feel like the routes that both of us have taken, where you've worked in diverse areas, it does make for a richer experience as being an editor. Because I think my many years in consulting, I worked across so many sectors. So you generally have an understanding of many sectors and many countries. And then when I moved to communication consulting, remember when I moved being the communication manager, the main thing was the company would say, okay, now we want more articles to come out. So I moved from this place where I had been writing 80-page reports to where now I'm pitching on behalf of the company articles to media. And that's when I realized no one wants to read your 80-page report. These days, people want a 800-word article. And so that's when and no one wants the 800-word article to be an executive summary of your long report. So it changed my mind again. I realized, okay, it's great that you did all this work for the 80-page report, but now you need to find a way to make it interesting for someone who's just scrolling on their phone and wants to read quickly. After that, becoming a freelance writer, I realized how you need to think through, okay, this might sound interesting, but you have to then think which publication is this best aligned to. You have to understand how different publications work. You have to understand the news cycle. You have to think of news hooks. So it's not just I want to write because I want to write. It's I want to write and this is timely. And you almost have to defend when you're pitching articles. You almost have to defend why this is important. And then now, having taken the role of being an editor, I'm on the other side where I'm receiving pitches, where I'm reviewing people's documents, and so on. So I think all those things definitely make for a better editor, because you just have a lot of diverse skills that you bring to the table, and experience and knowledge too.
So I'll come to Fadekemi, but I want to bounce off a question off that. I mean, so what are the proper journalistic training available out there for people who don't have that traditional first degree training? I mean, just basic ethics of maybe how to report, balance, all those things. What are these opportunities out there for people who don't have that background, who are not going into digital media? What are the opportunities out there? What was your experience? How did you get that?
In my case, I would say it was on the job. A lot of my experience has been on the job. So it's almost the time. I'm sure when I look at some of the articles I pitched to the former Quartz Africa editor, Adegoke, I look at them now and I say, oh, it was an article and I was excited about it, but now I can see so many errors in it. I can read it and say, what was the so what? What was this aspect? But with time, as I worked on more than 40 articles for Quartz in those years, with each you get feedback from the editor, you learn from that. So I would say a lot of it has been learning by doing, which has worked well for me. I don't know if I might not have the best answer for where you can get formal training, because I've really learned a lot of it on the job. And then obviously once you join a media house such as Quartz, there are guidelines, you do have the style guide and so on. But again, it's more on the job, because our style guide is around 200 pages. So it's very unlikely you'll sit and read it, but you will always consult it when you're editing an article. You want to know how do we normally, what words we use for this? We use hyphens for this. Are we using American English and British English? So you honestly, I've done a lot of learning on the job.
Oh, great. I saw Fadekemi laugh there when she made reference to not reading the Style Guide. So what are your opinion? What are your thoughts on these two questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ciku really just, she nailed it in her answers, I think the main thing that I would always index on whenever it's like coming into this space or like trying to like, in terms of like media coverage, it's just that openness and willingness to learn, because there would always be something new that's coming around, right? Like, I guess maybe if we touch on the likes of The Economist and the FT, like when they first started out, they, a big part of their business model was around like print, just like print distribution. And so the internet came around and just upended all of that, with the rise of social media apps, like Instagram, Facebook, and, them being able to generate that ad revenue. And taking and basically diverting those funds away from the typical like news publications. And so they had to adapt, and they had to learn very quickly about how the world around them was changing and how they could like fit themselves in better. So now you see them basically putting out these digital subscriptions, and they're just trying to, continue to make themselves relevant by delivering value to their paying readers constantly, and also thinking about like the wider community, like how can we continue to bring you into the fold? So I think it's just, that openness and willingness to learn and also adapt and move with the times, but not in I wouldn't say in like a reactive way. It would have to be very proactive. Like you're paying attention and you're seeing and you're checking the pulse. You have your finger on the pulse of like, where the media sector is heading and how you want to situate yourself in the midst of that. I can't remember your first question. Sorry.
I mean, the learning opportunities for media operators who don't have that traditional journalism training or background. What are the learning opportunities there? And do you think there are enough opportunities out there for operators in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that there's a lot of information out there. It might not all be about it might not all be specific, like just laser focused on the African space alone, but the fact that you have examples in like the West, in places like India, it just shows that, we're not doing this alone. We're not alone in terms of like trying to provide more quality information to the wider community and just help people understand the world around them better. So I think it's that process where it has to be continuous and iterative. Everybody just looking around, like, casting your net wide to understand like what resources are out there. Even events like this, like panel discussions like this are also very useful as like, information sharing, like gathering knowledge and learning from other industry operators out there.
Great. You touched on some really important points about the industry at large in Africa. And before we talk about the future and where it's headed, I think it's important to have a very good understanding of where we are right now. So I'd like to proceed with you. How would you describe the media landscape, or digital media landscape right now in Africa? What do you think, maybe in terms of quality output, in terms of reach, in terms of quality of talent, quality of production of stories put out there, regulation, fair speech? What are your thoughts?
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think when you look around at the digital media landscape, it's easy to get very excited about like the different products, the different ways that media houses or media publications are starting to experiment, right? Just trying to find a way to produce more information so that people can understand what is going on around them. But I think one of the things that is very apparent is there's a lot of work to be done. So I think when you were asking your question, you touched a bit on, regulation. So just how sometimes there can be a clamp down on media, and just that and how that presents like a challenge or an obstacle to how information is spread across the community and how people can reach it or engage with it. And I think just because that obstacle exists does not mean, we should all pack our bags and go home. Like, this is just something very difficult and there's no point. I think because this challenge exists is the very reason we have to continue, trying to push this good work out. Yeah. But it would obviously mean, there's definitely a lot to say around being realistic, understanding what these challenges are and how you can innovate around them and continue to push forward. Then there would also be challenges around talent as well, how you can find those so if you want to analyze the economy around you, you need people who can do that. And so sometimes that might not be the easiest thing to find, right? Just in terms of being able to first of all find that talent and also retain that talent. So it's very there's a lot of work that has to go in there. And so understanding that, and that's something that's very prevalent, I feel, in the African media landscape. And I think the last thing that I'll just touch on is just in terms of letting people understand that information is something that is worth paying for, right? Letting people understand that there's value, where value is produced, revenue can also be generated. So I think it's those three things that I would touch on.
Thank you. You shared really important points from the previous question on this. I hear, and I mean the feedback from previous question, I hear a lot of self-tutelage, great editors, in reference to Ciku's answer, and then just open-mindedness, curiosity, and self-learning. Fadekemi's response, because I'm seeing some really interesting contributions in the chat box. So I really wanted to highlight that as well. Great. So to Ciku, I mean the same question. What do you think? What's the state of Africa's digital media space?
Sounds good. So I'll add on the point that Fadekemi had talked about. So on the talent issue, I think talent is interesting because there are very many great writers and journalists out there, but sometimes it's just tricky aligning with them. And by that, I mean that some people you can have someone who's a great writer and then another person who's great on the technical part, but bringing the two together sometimes can be the challenge. And so you don't want someone who, when they write, it seems very, a bit dull, it's just very factual, because that's not that interesting for digital media. But you also don't want people who can't understand numbers, who can't understand concepts, who don't get the economics and politics behind different things. So I think that's one of the challenges that happens. It's just how to find people who bring all that together. And then the understanding that every media house has their different style. So you also need someone who's quick at learning what's the style, what's the tone, how does this particular media house approach their work. And I think one thing that helps people is if you read widely. I think if you read widely, you read articles by very many different publications, it also does kind of help you develop your own voice and confidence, but also if you know your material, you're going to be if you know your material, then you focus on improving your craft. That definitely helps. Another thing that Fadekemi talked about, which I thought was quite interesting, was the business model. It's true, a lot of digital media houses on the continent, the business model tends to be a bit of a struggle to understand how there are people out there who consume your content, but how do you find them? How do you monetize that? And under the business model, and I can give an example. So a few years back, Facebook was a huge driver of traffic to news companies. So even Quartz, we invested a lot in terms of making sure that Facebook was where because we're getting quite a bit of traffic from Facebook. Then they changed their model, and now Facebook doesn't really bring you that many people that many people seeing your material. So you have to then quickly pivot and think, okay, what's the next thing that we're going to focus on? So yeah, so I think those are some of the dynamics. And then another thing that we struggle, that many publications do struggle with is how to, it's when it comes to your audience. So I can give an example. Quartz is a global media house, but we are also, Quartz Africa is a regional media house within a global media house. And then we do have a niche focus, which is on technology, innovation, and business. So, and we are trying to cover the continent, many different factors. So how do you make it such that you're both niche, but you can also be interesting to a general reader? So it's tricky because as you get articles, sometimes you have to wonder, who does this article, appeal to the most? So the example I gave is maybe we might get an article on an interesting mobile money platform that's coming out of Somaliland. And as you get it, you think, okay, this will likely interest techies. Maybe it might interest the Somali diaspora, but then you have to wonder, will it interest the general reader, or what's the angle that we can give that interests the general reader? And then 54 nations, you don't act like you think they're all one country. So you always have, those are the day-to-day discussions that a digital media house has to take into account, especially when you're not just a national one, you're a regional one or a global one.
Great points. Before we go to business model, I want us to discuss a bit about around talent and quality of work coming out there. You made a very fine point around some talent just being really good with the technical stuff, proper journalism, they know how to do it, but they're also great writers. We currently have like that kind of challenge right now, So what do you think is the solution to that? What do you think? How do you think that is addressed? To Ciku.
The thing I've seen is that the easiest people to work with sometimes are those who are great writers, but just need to build on the technical skills. Because I feel as if great writing is the harder skill to teach. The analysis, understand economy and so on, I think that's easier. If I don't know, maybe if Fadekemi might think differently, but my feeling is that it's very hard to teach writing, good writing. It's easier for people to pick up the technical skills.
Oh, thank you. That's enlightening. That's enlightening. Also, in terms of the quality of work coming out, I mean, if you look at, so I'm trying to find a very definite classification of the state of digital media right now in Africa. If you look at the quality of work coming out from, say, the US, a journalist that wins the Pulitzer Prize, maybe it's one really fatal, exclusive or expose or investigative piece that wins the Pulitzer, or really massive work in comparison to the kind of work coming out on the continent here that wins the finest awards that we have. CNN has stopped the best awards they used to give. I think we have the Sanlam Financial Award in SC now. We have WITS and a couple of other ones. I feel like there's a wide gap in the quality of journalism coming out. And why do you agree? And if yes, why is that? To Ciku.
Okay, sounds good. In terms of quality, I definitely agree. There is a huge gap, but I don't want to solely base it on the journalists, because I think there's a lot of things at play, and I can talk about the Kenyan experience. So journalism schools, when I was growing up, journalists were trained they were at global standards. And so there was a way where when you saw a journalist, when you read what they read, you could tell that they were very, very technically strong. I think, and this is across the board, I think sometimes the education system, especially at university level, sometimes there's just a lot of gaps that are happening where people go through these schools and they come out, and maybe it's unfortunate, because also at the same time we do have a lot of scandals on people who are paying for their degrees and so on. So I think there's gotten to be the point where you could get a journalist who is actually not, when you read what they've written, there's so many typos, there's so many things which you would assume that if you've gone through, if you have a journalism degree, then at least you should have this bare minimum. So there's that aspect, which is that the government sometimes have not focused that much on, the training and so on. But some of these people, once they start working, you might realize that they can pick up this skill. So I would say there's a gap in terms of the education sector. But another thing is also funding gaps, because you'll find that, and maybe you've noticed, but there's some journalists who, when they were working on the continent, they had the ability to do amazing work, but the media houses they were working on the continent just don't have the same budgets that you'd have if you're working in one of the global publications. So this might be a great investigative journalist, but he's told, okay, go do this project in this place that's not safe, and this is the little money we'll give you, and we might not even give you per diem. So obviously when all that is taken into account, you can understand how they will not have the same quality of work as a global media house. But we do see that some of these journalists, once they are poached by larger media houses with higher revenues and that are able to invest more in them, they do thrive. So that shows it's not something to do with the person. It's more on like the environment, and if they're getting the support, especially the financial support that you need to be able to do top journalistic work.
Okay, so that means it'd be nice to have a grant specifically for like deep work, deep pieces, investigative pieces. It'd be nice to have a lot of that across the continent to help a lot of journalists pursue that.
Yes, and even with those limited budgets, there are some journalists on the continent who've done amazing work with almost no resources.
Yeah, I mean, Fadekemi, your point, please.
Yeah, no, I think Ciku makes some really, really good points about the availability of capital and how that impacts like the quality of work that can then be put out on the continent, right? Because just some of the funding challenges that you touched on, it's very, very important for people to like basically have access to monies that to have access to like the funds that they need to like carry out any like investigative like journalism work. I think another thing that I would point to that is very, very important for producing well thought out pieces is that ability to like, you know, take an issue or, you know, look at a big topic and just think about the different angles that can come out of that. And then also like thinking very critically about how you're going to build your argument so that you can land that point home even better. So for me, basically, when I look at the media landscape, just even across the board, so not just in Africa, I think that these are still gaps that we can plug. Like there's still a lot of steps that we can take when we're trying to get to that gold standard, right? There are Western publications that still make very general, broad brush assumptions about how, you know, even continents like Africa, how they work, or how businesses or consumers, how they interact and think with each other. And yeah, think about the issues that surround them. And I think, you know, we were touching on this earlier, like what's the value in having people who might not necessarily have had that like undergrad training in media? What's the value of having, in journalism, having them involved in like the media landscape now? And I think this is exactly it, right? Like even in the economics profession, something that came out a lot last year, like during the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, was just how there's a lot that each discipline can learn from other disciplines. Like when we adopt that multidisciplinary approach to essentially trying to problem solve in a particular area, then you're almost exposed to a wider range of like thinking. And so you can adapt that and use that to make your analysis more robust, more holistic, and you're thinking about things in a way that you might not necessarily have been formally trained to do, but then you can now adapt those new processes.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that a lot of people listening can take away as well is one of the problems with maybe news rooms or media houses here on the continent is maybe the lack of business managers to be able to run operations efficiently, think about the financial side and all of that. Yeah, okay, so let's go to the next point on business models and monetizations, you know, and this is to Fadekemi. What do you think? I know a lot of people are beginning to experiment with subscription, or maybe you could even share some light on what Stears' experience has been with the subscription model. What do you think about it? How is it going? Should more people join it?
Yeah, so I think earlier when I said, you know, where you're creating value, like you can also, there's also revenue that you can generate, right? And, you know, and I think that's one of the reasons why when people think about like, that's one of the reasons why there's this shift that we're seeing across like different industries towards a subscription-based model. So it's not just in like media. You would have maybe like a Netflix, for example, that would say that, you know, have this recurring payment agreement with us, and then you can continue to access content that we produce. And Spotify would also do the same thing. So it's covering across like film, information, news, music, just a broad range of sectors are already getting in on this. And the idea here is, you have that deep understanding that you are creating some kind of value for people. And so it is fair for you to kind of try to monetize that, to try to understand that I can now create this direct relationship with you. And then when we bring it more to the media landscape, it's that understanding that in the past, right, we had a situation where media publications would maybe have like their customer and their consumer as two separate entities. So your consumer is the person that is getting that information from you, but your customer is probably the person that is paying you. So that's where you're getting like your ad revenue from. But, like we touched on earlier, I think even Ciku talked about this, like how Facebook initially was, kind of like helping media publications to push eyeballs to their website. And now all of a sudden that has stopped because they now see that there's also money to be made there. And I think it was an article by The Economist that I was reading. They were talking about their own experience, right? And just saying how it got to a point that ad revenue like dropped from the really high numbers down to 18%, right? And then subscription revenue was now taking up more than half of like the revenue that they were bringing in. And year on year, they're continuing to see that growth basically coming in. So it's almost like there's value in merging your customer and your consumer, but so that you're saying to them that, look, I'm going to ask you to pay me for something, but I'm going to deliver quality on that. And the best way for you to build on that is to essentially have that trust. So whether you're creating that direct relationship with your consumer, you're learning from them to understand, okay, what is it that you want to hear from us? Because the bar would then be raised. When you ask people to pay you for your content, that means that you have to deliver on that content. You have to say that, okay, this is deep, original, insightful, insightful pieces that you cannot find anywhere else. So I would say that, that's the main experience there in terms of, you want to understand how to build that direct relationship between yourself as a company and your reader. And also understanding that content is just the first step. Like it's a very important step, but it's just the first step. The next thing is also how people are experiencing your content. So whether it's something exciting like a mobile app, it's improving the user interface of your website so that people can find your content better, they can engage with it better. You want to think of how you're going to build a beautiful product, right? And so it keeps people engaged with you and it keeps people understanding that, okay, this is not just information worth paying for, it's an experience worth paying for.
Great. I mean, you said a lot, but I want some specifics. Sorry, before I go to Ciku, please. I'd like you to give us a masterclass because there are quite a lot of media operators listening right now. So maybe just within 1-2 minutes, how exactly do you get that precise idea of what your audience wants? Right? For people who are probably running newsletters, Substacks, subscription models, digital, how exactly do you hear your audience's voice? How do you know exactly what they want? How do you decide in a precision attempt? Please.
Sure. So I think maybe a useful starting point for answering that question is when I think about the teams at Stears, right? It's very easy because the articles are like the final products. Like people might like, one thing that I would say is like my newsroom is a very, very important team. They're the ones who are doing that hard hit. They're the ones who are producing that hard hitting analysis, and they're also producing it in a very beautiful way. Like it's a very important thing for us is that storytelling aspect. And then beyond that, it's also just thinking about, okay, how are we even going to mix it up so it's not just text heavy, because sometimes people really like visual aids as a way of experiencing how you're communicating information to them. And so that could be from using charts, infographics, flow charts, all these different things to just kind of pass your message across. But then that's only one step. As much as I would say that my newsroom is an important team, it's not the only important team, right? Like, again, this is just touching on what I said about multidisciplinary approaches. Like, you have your team of engineers, like people who can perform data analysis, people who are performing data analysis to understand, okay, where are you overproducing content that maybe people are not necessarily interested in, or underproducing content that people actually want to hear more about, and you can bring more angles to this conversation. Like, these are additional, these are other members of the team that also contribute to producing this really beautiful product. Or even your engineers who are thinking about ways to reduce that friction between when like a potential subscriber comes to your product and wants to, pay, and whether they're able to like quickly just get value out of that, or if they're going to have to like face additional challenges. So there are a lot of different people that basically come in to create that secret sauce of, your final beautiful output.
Great. Great. I assume that a lot of people got a lot of information from that. From design, graphics, visual appeals, aesthetics, to good writing, storytelling, to data analysts, looking at the numbers to interpret what the people really want. Great. Let me go to Ciku. I want to ask you about business models, funding channels. Apart from advertising, apart from subscription, what other options are out there? Which digital media locally is deploying that strategy? What do you think Africa is missing out on in terms of revenue sources?
Yeah, I think I'm still just positioned to speak more on subscription. So I hope it's okay if I jump back to add more on what Fadekemi said.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I can give an example on our own experience. So Quartz Global, we've always had a subscription model, which has been working quite well. And now Quartz Africa, we're looking to launch a subscription product starting in January. So all the discussions we're having right now, it's so concrete for us because we've been going through the process of understanding who our readers, what they like, what value can we give them, what specific value can we add that they'll be willing to pay for, given there's already all this free content that they've gotten. And what we learned was a few things. One was definitely what Fadekemi says, if you're offering value, then there's a way that you can be able to monetize it. And the big thing we noticed with the types of readers that we attract, they do pay for subscriptions, or they are willing to pay for subscriptions insofar as it helps them in their work life. So that was one of the big things we realized, was they want products that will help them. If they're a startup founder, they want products that will, help them get information that's useful for their startups. They want products that will allow them, if they're, let's say, an example of a Nigerian startups have been expanding a lot regionally. They want to understand how what are the regulations in different African countries? How is the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement going to be implemented, and how can we benefit from this? So those are real tangible things that they want. In addition to that, they want opportunities to network with each other. So whether it's a startup founder in one country and a startup founder in another country. So there's that level of, they want those relationships, but they also want relationships with potential funders. And that's one area we saw as an opportunity for us, because we are a global media house. We do have this connection. So we saw that, okay, there's a way where we can have events, which, once you're a member, then you can be able to have events where you could potentially meet funders. So for us, those were the big things that we looked at when we were thinking of the subscription product, because we do have all the free products, which are the website, the articles on the website. We do have our Quartz Africa weekly brief that will still remain free, but we had to think of information that would now specifically interest people to pay for. The second area I would talk about is what Fadekemi mentioned about the products have to be beautiful, and how the form and the content. So Quartz has always been known for, we're known for our articles and our website. People love those, but what we've always been known for are our newsletters. And I hope I'm not bragging, but we do very amazing newsletters. So that's
about those too.
What's that?
Talk about those too.
Yes. And you've
we get fan messages every day on Twitter, every day.
And it's interesting because now a lot of people are catching on to newsletters, but I know also TechCabal has been doing their newsletter for quite a while. And it's the same for us too. Newsletters have been what we are known for. That's the main way that we're engaging with our customers and now our consumers. And so that's the form we want to keep following, even for the subscription product, because we've seen that people like this idea of getting something customized in their inbox that's interesting. They feel like they're talking to you directly, in addition to going to the website. So in our newsletters, we have relaunched our newsletters so far with new different products, but we have the ones that are doing, people really love our company newsletter, which comes out once a week, which focuses on a different company. So it will have more African companies coming out, but some of the examples we've had were Didi, the Chinese ride-hailing company. So even though it's a Chinese ride-hailing company, and reader on the continent would be interested because there's a lot of ride-hailing companies on the continent that are still trying to figure out the business model and are coming across regulatory challenges. So I think there's a way that's what we are known for, and that's what we need to keep on doing well. There's another newsletter that we do, which is called the Forecast, where we just think of a big picture of what's a certain trend that we need to talk to people about, whether it could be cryptocurrency in Africa. It could be, there's a whole different range of things that we talk about. But I think for us, those are the forms that seem to work really well. And our newsletters, we take a lot of attention to them. There's the graphics, there's the artworks, there's the artwork, there's always going to be a chart, a picture, and all those. Because as Fadekemi mentioned, people don't want to just see a lot of text. And so you have to play around with interesting visual ways of sharing content.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So this is for our audience. We'll soon be wrapping this up. So if you've got any questions, please just put them in the Q&A chat box over there, and then we'll take it up very soon. Just a few more minutes. I'd like to ask this, shoot this as Ciku. There's this interesting trend of, I'm beginning to see it. I've seen a lot of it in Nigeria. I'm beginning to see in South Africa, a couple of things have been happening between fintech companies or just startups generally, building a content department, building a media arm, and they can't train talent. So the easiest thing they do is just poach from QZ, from TechCabal, from Stears, and probably pay them a lot of money. I don't know how that works. But what do you see? How would this impact the future of digital news media in Africa? What do you think would happen? How is this good? Would this facilitate the acceleration of more talent? Would it make things difficult for us? What do you think?
Just making sure I'm clarifying the question. It's about fintech companies, African fintech companies starting their own media houses and poaching from different publications.
Yeah.
The way I see it, and this is my life philosophy, I don't see things as a zero-sum game, because I know many times people have this reaction of, if this other organization starts, then we'll be competing for talent, then we'll have fewer people. The way I see it is that it's good for us. It's good for us if there's more organizations that are building talent, if there's more organizations that are looking for young, talented African journalists, because there's a lot of people who need employment. So in my mind, I'm like, this is great that there's, that they're moving in this way. Another thing I think about that is it's great to see us owning our stories. So I can talk about in the Quartz Africa experience, and I never mentioned this in the beginning, but one of the big things that made me fall in love with the publication long before in 2016 or so on, when I started first writing for them, was I stumbled upon this article. I was online and I stumbled upon this article which was talking about these two Congolese female engineers who'd come up with traffic robots that were being used in Kinshasa. And that was the first time in my adult life that I'd come across a positive article on DRC in a global media house publication. And for me, that my first thought was, I want to write for these people because they clearly seem to think of the continent as a place of opportunity versus as a place of poverty and all the main tropes that are there in general global media publications about the continent. So with what you're saying about African fintech companies poaching or getting more journalists to write about the continent, I think it's great, because anytime when there's an opportunity for more Africans to tell our own stories, whether it's in fiction or non-fiction. I think it's amazing when we get to own our stories. So I would love to see those fintech companies pull journalists from everywhere, not just Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa. But I want to see what people will write about from Comoros. Maybe there's a budding tech scene in Comoros and we don't know about it. Maybe there's a budding tech scene in Angola and we are not reading about it. So yeah, so I'd say I think it's a great move, and I wish them well, and I wish that they can keep expanding the network of Africans telling African stories.
Great, thank you. Fadekemi, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Ciku makes really, really good points about, the impact that this would have on just expanding the media ecosystem. It just makes people understand that this is now a very exciting place to work. It's an exciting sector to kind of getting on the action on and I guess what it signals for, or what it points out for media publications like Stears Business, Quartz Africa, is just you have to find a way to make your own offering to the labor market even more competitive, right? So like, what new and exciting things can you now offer like an analyst or a writer who is going to come and work with you? And so it's just thinking like beyond just the traditional ways of producing content. I think one of my favorite things that Stears Business has ever like come out with would be the election center that got almost like, I think it was up to 2 million visitors to the site. And it could have been, I think an easy strategy for us could have just been, when we're covering the elections, to just go about maybe writing another 10 to 20 articles again, just explaining to people, this is what is happening, this is how you can understand it better. But then we just found like a different way to visualize the information better for people, so they could actually like track this information in real time. And even just thinking about the shareability element of it, it's just, how you can it's almost like when, I guess like the US election, something that people say is how America tends to be the center of the world. And when the US election is happening, there are all these like polls happen. Like CNN is covering these polls. They have all these very exciting dashboards that they put out, and people get excited and they can join the conversation, right? So that produces a very, very different, sorry, it just looked like okay, was frozen, but that just produces a very, very different effect, and could even bring in more people to your product, other than what you would have captured if you were just writing more articles in this space. Another thing as well would be like, Stears recently won the Google News Initiative, so the GNI, and that's just part of like the work that's being done to improve journalism like across the continent. And I think besides us, only two other companies won that. And so for us, it's like, why did we win that? It's because we wake up and we're thinking about, okay, what's a new and exciting way that we can now produce information, quality information, and beautiful information for people. So I think it's those kinds of things that would get the existing labor market and even the new entrants into the labor market to say, okay, I know that there are other employers out there, but I'm willing to back like this particular media publication, just because of the exciting work that they're constantly putting out.
Thank you. I've had a really, really exciting time. Gotten some good feedback as well. A lot of great comments there. So there's some questions that have been dropped in the Q&A. Some also dropped it in the chat. I'll go straight right away to them. A poll, a survey would also be dropped. This is for our audience. A survey will be dropped. So please fill in the survey. Let's have your responses. It will be dropped in the chat room. The first question I would like to take was directed at Fadekemi by Stephen. This is by Stephen. Yeah, he says, "I appreciate your detailed response regarding how Stears generates content that people like to see, such as when you spoke on the role of the data analysis team, the engineering team, the use of charts, etc. However, this works because you have a big team able to handle all these facets. For individuals who are just starting out, trying to grow their newsletters on Substack, for example, what practical advice do you suggest to gauge audience feedback and drive growth?" Yeah, Fadekemi.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And my main answer there would just never underestimate the power and impact of, actually just directly asking people for feedback on how well you are doing. Some of my favorite newsletters, I follow a lot of independent newsletters, just as part of my own way of building my knowledge, or keeping my own pulse on what are people saying out there, how people like understanding the economy, and feeding that back into the content that we produce. And some of my favorite newsletters that do that, they're not shy to ask for feedback. Just having that feedback loop included in the newsletter, whether you can directly send an email response or reaching out on social media to let people share with you like what worked well, what doesn't work, what didn't work well, and also not being afraid to experiment with new forms of writing, with a new form of like getting your newsletter out there. Like thinking about more creative ways to structure the story that you're telling, whether you're employing like something. So we've talked about this, like something that's just very text heavy. I think there's a newsletter, sorry, the name is just not coming to my mind right now, but there's a newsletter that I follow, and they use really interesting charts, but they're not your typical PowerPoint or Excel type charts. It almost looks like scribbles, where you're just sketching out an illustration of a point that you have made. So you're giving people those additional visual aids. And I feel like it's something that I'd never seen anywhere before, and I never would have thought that it would work. But that particular newsletter has continued to adopt that strategy over time. So it's possible that they have gotten really good feedback on it, that it works well, to engage their readers. I think it's still back to what I said about, you want to establish that direct relationship with your readers. You want them to see how you are growing and developing with their interests, and how that feeds back into what you send to them.
Thank you. Makes a lot of sense. One thing I noticed too is a lot of media operators don't do surveys, and across my career, this is a lot of people do surveys. They don't they know what the audience wants. Take this news, read it. It's funny, it's hilarious. There's another question here from Temitope Adelanwa. It says, I would like to ask Ciku how to stay true to your brand essence and style while leveraging trends on digital media. For example, currently everyone seems to be leveraging the Squid Game trend, even if it does not connect well with them. Yeah, I think this is an interesting question. It marries to the question I wanted to ask, but due to shortage of time, I just jumped in. It's about media operators having to balance between doing stories that are newsy, people want to search, as opposed to like doing quality content. How do you achieve that balance? How do you maintain your brand?
Yeah, interesting question, Temitope. And I think, I'm happy you asked this, because I was looking forward to doing the newsy versus quality content question. I don't think you have to pick one or the other. I think the main thing is you have to know what your mission is and then align with that. So for Quartz, our mission is make business better. So one of the big things we ask as we work on any story, there's many stories we can write about, but the main thing we ask about as we work on any story is, what's the economy, how does this tie to the global economy, or what's the business angle on this? So Squid Game, we've written about it, but how we've written about it is, one, we did an article that was actually looking at without any spoilers, but we did an article that was actually talking about inequality, because that's a big theme in Squid Game, but it's a big theme in developed and developing countries worldwide that has gotten worse with the pandemic. It's just how there's the have and the have-nots, and how does that play out? And so we did an article on that, but really talking about not North Korea, but talking about South Korea and how the economy has all the problems the economy has gone through. And our article even started with the structural adjustment programs of the 80s and 90s and how that affected Koreans. And a lot of us from African countries also do know how our economies tanked as a result of that. So that was one of the articles we did on Squid Game. So it was a Squid Game article, so it's newsy, but it still stays true to our mission. Another one that we did on Squid Game was how Netflix is changing their algorithm to show viewers more global content. And why this is important for us was, we asked, why is Netflix doing this? And they're doing this because there's the opportunity for them. They're seeing value in global content, and so they're pushing it more to all their viewers, because they actually see that way that if people watch this, people are watching it clearly, and so they can derive more revenues from such shows. And we've written also about King of Boys, which for us the big thing that interested us the most was, yes, the rise of Netflix on the continent, but King of Boys for us was interesting because it was a Nigerian homegrown production for the first, it was everything was done in, it was originally just a fully Nigerian production, and it attracted Netflix, and that's how it became a series for the next version. So it was just showing that on the continent we are making material that is so interesting that it gets big name media houses behind it. So I think those are some of the examples on how to stay newsy but still true to your mission.
Thank you. This is from Olivia Gao. This says, when you interview tech entrepreneurs, how do you balance between in-depth insights and confidential information? When you interview tech entrepreneurs, how do you balance between in-depth insights and confidential? Look, I guess Olivia is talking about when you want to report the article, when you're writing the article, how do you balance giving incisive analysis on the company or whatever, and protecting trade secrets or something, confidential information. Let me push this to Ciku.
The biggest thing in that would be to ask. So if we interview tech entrepreneurs, you'll have the discussion, but we'll ask, is there anything, especially if it's an open and very frank discussion, is there anything we shouldn't mention from this? Because some things can be confidential depending on who you're talking to and the time you're talking to them. So it might be a certain company might be okay talking about their current valuation under normal circumstances, but maybe they're just about to go through a funding round, or there's something that's super sensitive and they say, okay, I gave this number, but don't actually, you can't mention this number there. There might be things about the board that they mentioned, but they don't want to have it in the article. So I'd say one thing is definitely just ask what from our discussion is not for, and most people will say it. You'll have a discussion and they'll say, please, that's off the record. And if it's off the record, it's off the record. So I'd say that's something important to note, because we do want, even as we interview them, we want to create a supportive atmosphere. We don't want to do something where you could sabotage, the future of an African startup because of something you wrote.
Fadekemi, it seems you want to say something.
No, I think that's a very well-rounded answer. It's definitely a game of, well, I don't want to say game, but it's definitely one of those things where you have to achieve that fine balance between managing relationships on both sides. So, you have that duty to your readers to give them like a full picture, like a critical and rigorous analysis of like a particular business that you've decided to investigate or cover. But then on the other hand as well, like you want to be honest and open with the people who are actually giving you the source, the people who are providing this information to you, because I think we've touched on this in this conversation, that one of the challenges facing the media landscape would be that access to data. And so as we're trying to overcome that, it would essentially, like, we're essentially building and plugging and actively plugging like the data gaps and holes that already exist in understanding different African economies. And so for us to be able to do that, we have to have conversations with the people who are the operators in this space. And so managing those relationships with them is very crucial. And so being open with them and having that agreement on, on what terms are we sharing information here, and how can we, and how can you make sure that you're staying true to your own editorial stance? So at Stears, we maintain that every ideology or every business has a right to basically be explored and to be understood by different people. It's not about us kind of picking a side. It's just about presenting the entire picture, the entire story, and then for people to come away from that too. So yeah, it's not that we're trying to spoon feed people and say this is exactly what you should think. It's just this is how you can think about this topic or this sector or this industry, and these are the tools that we're giving you to understand that.
Yeah, I wanted to add something quite quick, Adegoke, to that question that I hadn't mentioned, was for us also one thing that's important, because sometimes you might find out critical or negative information about an entity, it could be a startup or anyone else that you're writing about. And at Quartz, we have a requirement that if you're writing something critical about an organization, you need to reach out to them to react to it. So we find out information, we'll always make sure we say, this is the article, this is what's about to come out, at least give them an opportunity to respond. Sometimes they don't respond, but we always make sure you reach out before we publish that.
Thank you so much, guys. I thought this was really brilliant answers. Ciku and Fadekemi, I thought it was really brilliant answers, because that's actually a very good point. We have this rule in TechCabal, BCM generally, we call it good judgment. Writers, reporters must have a sense of good judgment. Like, you're working on a story, you're working on a piece, your intuition should go off and be like, this is sensitive information. You need to make that good judgment, like, let me have this conversation with this founder or something. Should this go out? Should I write about this? And like you rightly said, like, you get critical information about a company, you need to reach out, first. And I think it's important that journalists be objective, balanced, both sides, don't take a side. You guys give a really, really brilliant answer. Thank you very much for that. I'm sure Olivia will be satisfied with that. This person didn't give their name, his or her name. Both Fadekemi and Ciku didn't mention events when talking about sources of revenue. Is it that it's difficult to pull off in Africa, or from their experience it doesn't work? I think Ciku mentioned event about bringing together startup founders. I mean, operators generally across the continent, because they want to connect, and it's part of a product that they're building. But let me push this to Fadekemi. I don't think I've seen a Stears event. Yeah. So do you think it's not possible?
Not you dragging me. But yeah, no, I definitely would not say. I'll definitely say that there's value to be gotten from, hosting events. We've talked about that, just in terms of how useful they are for growing the ecosystem. So having this exchange of ideas, right, where people can come together and just even like network and build and think about ways to keep pushing the frontier of the media landscape forward. And I think there have been successes in terms of, I haven't looked under the hood on this enough, but I feel like what it looks like is there would definitely be successes in terms of thinking about ways to monetize this. But if you are going to go into that space, you have to, execution is very key, right? You have to know like what new thing you're going to be able to bring. So many people are already hosting events, just trying to basically, whether it's a conference or, like a summit or a panel discussion. So many things are already happening in that space. And so it's important for us as a brand, before we go into that for it, to understand, okay, what new thing are we going to be bringing into the conversation, so that people walk away from it understanding that, yes, that this is something that created value for them.
Thank you so much. Again, this is to our audience. There is a poll which will be launched in, I believe it should be launched by now, in the chat room. Please attempt those polls, please. And also a survey as well. Please, let's send in our submissions for the survey. Yeah, it's come up right now. Yeah, please. Thank you. This is another question from, who is this? Is there a name? This has no name. This has no name. Okay. It says, how can tech journalists work around the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil culture of founders, investors, and other stakeholders in the African tech ecosystem, in particular Nigeria, to produce quality work and not only fundraising or product announcements? Okay, let's Fadekemi. I don't know if Ciku is privy to this. Are you? No, okay. Fadekemi, take a shot at it.
I think something that I like saying is when you have different players in like any value chain, like trying to produce something, or trying to take something from the ideation stage all the way down to the final consumer, you have different players that are involved. You see how it's possible for misaligned incentives or interests to kind of come about. And so it's about thinking thinking of how you want to manage that very effectively. So whether it's on like the VC side, they could have like a different set of interests or goals or guidelines that are basically informing the decisions that they would like to see, like a business make. And so also like on the business side of things, there would also be that like competing interests that is coming out of it. But at the end of the day, I think there is common ground to be found. It's in terms of just understanding like where those similarities lie, where the differences come out, and how you can essentially mitigate for them to arrive at like a mutually beneficial outcome. Sometimes that might not always happen. And again, it's that thing about discretion. So you as a media publication, where do you stand when you understand that what is very important to you is building that trust with your readers, having that direct relationship with you so that they know that any information or insights that you're giving out to them is totally unbiased. It's just to help them, it's just to equip them with the tools that they need to understand the economy around them, get smarter about things, and make wiser decisions or choices. So at what point is that jeopardized, and then how do you essentially shift or move forward?
Thank you so much. I think one thing I'd like the audience, especially the reporters or writer journalists, to take away from this is that that strive for balance. Not to take sides, as a reporter, as a journalist, you're supposed to be objective. What I find a lot is people take sides, which shouldn't be. At the moment you attempt to be objective, it will help you a lot. Definitely, operators would not want anyone to report anything bad about their company or something, But as journalists or the media, the fourth estate, our work primarily is speak truth to power, help people understand what is happening around them, So if you do it, if you're guided by that principle to want to help your constituents or your society or whatever it is, it will help you answer a lot of things, and it will help determine how you approach a lot of stories. Yeah. This is from Judith Hassan. She says, "Hello, I work for a nonprofit that leverages development communication to promote development outcomes. This means a lot of what we are working to produce is content that will be powered by communication strategies using mostly digital media. Do you think running as a nonprofit is a sustainable model? Are there similar organizations you have come across? This should go to Ciku."
I hope I'm understanding the question. So she's asking about communication being run by a nonprofit and how. Okay, I think I need a clarification, because do they do their own communication, or are they looking for the articles to be published elsewhere?
I mean, they do that. So let me take it again. I work for a nonprofit that leverages development communication to promote development outcomes. This means a lot of what we are working to produce is content that will be powered by communication strategies using mostly digital media. Do you think running as a nonprofit is a sustainable model? Are there similar organizations you have come across who definitely use content to achieve their goals?
I think there are a few nonprofits that are in the communication sector, and I mean, it's tricky to talk about the business model because I don't understand like the working of the organization itself, because maybe they have a huge funder or they have a huge grant that will allow them to test out the process. Because I think if what she's saying is that they'll likely do their own product, in which case they need to know that they have an audience that will go for that will read their content. And there are quite a few like NGOs that have like a strong communication arm and people who read their content. So it really depends on what the organization is, on the content, on who their target audience is. I wouldn't say it's easy, because it is a niche type focus of work that they're doing. And I don't even know, maybe it's like in education, maybe it's in health, maybe it's general. But I think there is a market for that, but it takes a bit of understanding who your readers are. Because the other alternative, the other thing I've seen even with some of the NGOs, is they pitch articles to different publications to write for them. But the big thing again is you have to know, and I mean, I was on the other side, not as an NGO, but in a communication, in a consulting firm. But you also have to know what the media house focuses on, what their interests are, because sometimes NGOs put out information and to them it's interesting, but then to a general reader it's not that captivating. So maybe doing it in-house might work for them, or they could also find another publication that does a lot of that takes stories related to development. So I'm thinking of publications such as Christian Science Monitor and so on. So it's either they're going to keep pitching a lot and they have to figure out which particular publications will take their work, or they'll do their own stories, and maybe they have a funder backing them. But I can't really comment on whether that's the right business model because I don't know the dynamics of the organization.
Oh, cool. Okay, so the second part of the question is, are there similar organizations you've come across? I mean, you mentioned Christian Science Monitor or something.
So organizations, there are quite a few NGOs that have their own communication branches. And sometimes those would be large, those would be like, you have quite a few communication people. So when I think of like the Open Society Initiative of West Africa, actually most of the Open Society Foundations, but again, they have more funding. So they might not be the best example because that's they're funded by the founder of the Open Society is George Soros. So maybe for them they can afford to invest a lot in communication and hopefully they find an audience. But I don't know. It really depends on whether your funder has deep pockets.
All right. So I don't know if this would help Judith, but I've had some experience with budget, like 5, 6, 7 years ago. Budget does, they interpret the Nigerian budget for the average person so that they can understand. So their work is heavily communications. Before was a lot of communication. Now they're doing a lot of grassroots work. So they did generate their content in-house, infographics, articles, everything. They did it in-house. Their business model really was grants. They hired someone in-house that all this person did from January 1st to December 31st was look for grants and apply. And it got some huge grants. I think Open Society as well. They got $3 million from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Budget is led by Shioni Bide, So, I mean, I don't know if that helps you. I guess they are a non-profit as well. Okay, so then another thing they did was they turned their skill in infographics and communication into a business unit. So they then started selling their skill, data analytics. I mean, they were one of the forerunning users of data journalism in Nigeria, at least as far as I knew. Budgets will be partnered with ICGF to then train newsroom journalists across Nigeria on data journalism. So they actually turned that skill to a business offering to banks for their annual reports, what have you, to companies. So I don't know if that helps you. The opportunities there. All right. This is from Abdullahi. I think this would be maybe a second to the last question. Abdullahi Sani, I guess that's the right pronunciation. Do you see any interests in, the question is for Ciku. Do you see any interest in science stories across the continent? How can media publications in Africa report on science in a way that will attract the audience, students,
Yes, I definitely see an interest in science stories across the continent. So for us, given our focus is on technology, business, and innovation, we do write quite a few science articles, but it has to be tied to something to do with the larger economy, to the larger economy and business. So some science articles might be straight up, I don't know, this new species has been discovered somewhere. That might not be the best type of story for us because it's hard to connect from that to, what happens next and why is this important for the global economy. But if it's a topic, if it's a story on, we've written quite a lot about vaccines, including malaria vaccine and the new malaria vaccine that's been WHO approved, because that one ties, we can easily be able to tie it to, what's going on in the global, it's newsy. We can tie it to what's going on in the global vaccines right now, even for COVID-19. But it's also interesting to the economy because with malaria, you can talk about all the the deaths, the loss to the economy, the loss to society. So I would say it's on a case by case interest, but I'm pretty sure there's some publications that just focus on science. So for us, science is one of the things we write about, but I wouldn't say that it's the only thing we write about. But definitely when there is an intersection of science and technology and innovation, then that's something we write about too. So if it's something about African scientists have discovered XXX, that for us is innovation. So then we'd cover it in that way. I hope that answers your question.
So he says, how can media publications in Africa report on science in a way that will attract? So I think he really wants an answer around scale or method of reporting in a way that will attract the audience to read. How do you think we can report stories on science?
I think by making them relatable. I don't know if I have the best answer for this, because as I mentioned, it's a small area of the writing we do. So I don't know if I can really talk about how to use it then to attract the audience. But what I think of is if we write the stories in a way that's relatable and we can show what the real life importance of science is, if we tie it to technology, because people are very interested in technology, they're interested in innovation and such changes, and maybe if we can tie it to it comes to what's the so what about it. Like, yes, there's this science story, but if we can talk about the larger implications of it for the economy and the business, maybe that's ways that it can attract an audience.
Okay, great. This is for Fadekemi from Jonathan. These questions just came in, but I think they're important. Let's quickly take them. It says, how developed is the premium content model in Africa? For example, what Stears Business does? Why are more media sites, websites, more into the ad revenue model than paid for content model?
Yeah, I think that's another question. I actually met someone in the middle of this week from Sierra Leone, who was just basically talking about how, like, in Sierra Leone, there's just been a lot of pressure that the media publications have been facing, whereby, it's very difficult to convince people to pay for information, and so that is why a lot of the media houses there have just relied on ad revenue instead. But then the main thing to bring out there is there's a huge risk involved in that as well. There's a huge risk involved with both approaches, but the risk there is you are now depending on people who are not necessarily going to consume your content for your income. And so that would obviously affect the quality of content that you can then put out. Sometimes it could be like the government itself is funding the ad revenue generation, or like some other business that's just trying to push their own agenda. And so when you have that, it becomes difficult for people to know that they can come to you for trusted information. So if you, as a media publication, that is what is most important for you, then you have to revisit that business model and understand if that is the best way for you to kind of get that information out to your readers and build that relationship with them, right? It's not an easy journey. I think something that we're learning is the more we learn, the more there is to learn, right? And it's almost like hand holding, like basically taking people through that experience of this is why a subscription business model works, and why it's a good way for you to get your information or your content so that you understand the world. And I think I said this earlier as well, that in terms of media, like the news, those of us who produce news or give people data analysis and information on the economy, we're not the first ones to try and do this. You have the likes of Spotify and Netflix. So we're basically building in a digital era, and we have to think like in the way these companies who are involved in the business of content creation, we have to think like them as well, right? Like, what are the best ways to innovate and to understand the consumer that you're bringing your products to, so that you can adjust and optimize for that?
Great answer. One more for Fadekemi. Sorry, so this is anonymous. I used to cover the business desk in a major newspaper, and I have observed a trend which is that almost all tech guys snub traditional media while focused on digital media platforms like TechCabal, etc. For the dissemination of information within the tech space. Is this intentional? If so, why?
So I'm not a tech bro, so I can't really speak for tech bros. But I mean, something that I think Ciku talked about is when, as an editor, when you're making decisions about an article that has been pitched to you, you have to think about, okay, what audience is this suited for? Are there people, how many people are going to be interested in this story? Is it enough for us to actually like get this story out there? Is there more work that we can do essentially to let people understand that this is something that you should care very deeply about? And so if you are a TechCabal, Stears Business, a Quartz Africa, that is essentially making sure that you're constantly thinking about what is coming next, the frontier economy, how you're going to push or break the boundaries of what is currently being covered. It means that you'll be serving those operators who are also thinking about that future or new economy. If you're not doing that, if you're not in that mind frame, then of course people are not going to go to you for information, because you're almost like living in the past, and you're not necessarily equipping people for what they need to make decisions about the present and the future.
Thank you. I think you pretty much answered it. Tech bros come to tech platforms because that's where their investors read. Those are the media platforms that their investors read, stakeholders read. But some tech companies actually also go to traditional media. Those are guys that are trying to go for B2C. They're now big, they raise funding, they need to get customers, they need to speak to regulators, so they start dealing with traditional news media platform, Punch, Vanguard, and the rest. All right, the last one from Richard. Richard, all right. I'm building a Nigerian tech startup that has more than 1,200 employees and revenues of more than $7 million a year. We have not taken any funding though, so media outlets don't write about us. Also, they've not done a the fundraise call. How can successful startups that don't have a funding event, get the attention of the media? To Ciku, how can they pitch? How can they get the attention of media? How can they do media relations? Yeah.
Sounds good. I dropped the email address that you can use, because a few people had asked about pitches. So please, if you have pitches, send them through to africa@qc.com. And I would say we are very democratic about the process. So for us, if we find, obviously it's easier to find startups when there's a funding announcement, but we have written about and we pride ourselves on being able to identify startups that are doing interesting work even before they blow up. So if you somehow remained under our radar, just send us an email. And for us, the big thing is, what if we see what you're doing is innovative, what you're doing is interesting, and what you're doing can change the space, then we will likely be able to consider you for, we'll likely be able to consider writing about you. But I think it's interesting. You said a startup with 1,200 employees. I'm quite impressed, and I'm quite surprised that we haven't yet written about you. So please, yes, feel free to write something, a little blurb that tells us why we should write about you. I'll send that to africa@qc.com.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ciku. Thank you, Fadekemi. I'm sure our audience have learned a lot. I'm sure it was exciting for them as well. It was exciting for me. I actually took one or two notes as well. I want to thank our audience. Thank you so much for being a part of this. We are nothing without you. Please do note that we have a post-event survey. So please fill that survey. We need it. It helps us improve our product to you. This event was produced by TechCabal Insights, TC Insights for short. TC Insights is a TechCabal data research and intelligence unit, which provides actionable data on startups and the tech ecosystem across Africa to investors, to entrepreneurs, and big tech companies, regulators, and other players on and off the continent. Thank you so much. Look forward to this conversation again, next conversation. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.